As you can see, Russell Wilson is a bit all over the map, with his range being 20 and a normal range being about maybe 7. So, Wilson is very divisive between analysts and stats alike, and Fields is a bit more consistent, which I think makes sense because he plays on script more. With that said, if you're unfamiliar with expected points added plus completion percentage over expected or success rate, be sure to check out my videos that I did on them because they'll help you understand some of the best stats in football. With that out of the way, the Steelers have somewhat of a quarterback controversy, I would say, because Wilson can play really nice when he's not inside the red zone, but Fields is going to have to take over, I think, those responsibilities in a Taysom Hill role. Obviously, I'm not saying Fields is Taysom Hill. I'm saying he's much better than that. But I think it'll be similar to what Taysom Hill did when he was with Drew Brees in the latter days of his career, where Brees would play in the middle parts of the field and Taysom would come in and be a running threat and also a little bit of a threat to pass. Fields is much more of a threat to pass than Hill has ever been, but I think the roles will be somewhat similar. Moving forward, the offensive line is something that is definitely not helping them in either case, as they rank 21st in pass blocking when combining PFF's pass blocking grade with ESPN's pass blocking win rate. So they're really not doing that well. They're not doing super poorly, but they're almost a bottom 10 unit. And I would say that checks out with what I've seen from watching all of the games as well. They're not great. Someone who is doing a lot to help, though, is George Pickens, who is ascending to being an elite receiver. And I think part of that is Russell Wilson is a better deep ball passer than he's had in his career. But man, Pickens is just so good on his own merits as well. Pickens is 14th in yards per game and 22nd in yards per reception, which is a little bit backwards. He is, I would say, a top 5 deep ball winner. So for him to be backwards in yards per reception behind yards per game, that just doesn't make sense to me entirely. But I guess we haven't always had Wilson there, so part of his stats came with Fields. Fields has a decent deep ball though as well, so it's kind of confusing. Either way, Pickens is elite deep downfield, and he can win with slants as well mainly. He's kind of a two route guy at this point, just streaks and slants, but you know what? It works. Fryermuth, he's 100th in yards per game and 100th in yards per reception, which I think is perfect because he just is a very consistent player. So he's very consistent across stats also. He's a good blocker too, so he helps a lot in a variety of ways. Someone who's helping more this season than I would have ever expected is Calvin Austin, who, albeit is 101st in yards per game and a much better 7th in yards per reception. So he's elite in that regard, which bears out. He wins deep, I would say at least once a game for like a 30-yard reception, which is about 98% of his total production for said game. So he is really, really contributing, at least in the deep parts of the field. Someone who isn't contributing much, but could later down the line, is Mike Williams, who's 175th in yards per game, but 15th in yards per reception when you factor in enough plays for him to count for the stat. So it's a very small sample size. He's not even making up enough receptions to be, or enough playtime rather, to be considered a leader for yards per reception. So it's really hard to gauge what he's doing, but it's something to go off of. He's shown that he can win deep downfield with some proficiency. An issue for the offense, though, is the rushing game. Arthur Smith is known to be a really good running game offensive coordinator, but that has not bared out too much. It's better than with Matt Canada, but then again, what isn't? Smith has the rushing offense as 21st in rushing expected points added and 23rd in rushing success rate. So they're not great in either regard. Where they are great, though, as you could imagine, is the defense, where they're 7th in defensive expected points added and 13th in defensive success rate. That's elite stuff. They are roughly top 10 in both. They're equidistant in both stats. And I think that really checks out because they're a real boomer bust defense for the most part, where they're either sacking you or giving up a 20-yard gain. They're, forcing you into an incompletion that could be a tipped ball interception, or they're giving you just too much of a cushion in coverage and getting beat. So they're very boomer bust, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that can really work, especially depending on the matchup, but it's a bit frustrating at times. With that said, they have 7 above average starter caliber players, I will say. And the reason I say caliber is because there's one player on here that's not technically a starter, but he is definitely worthy of being one. So to start off, though, we have TJ Watt, who is super elite. He's kind of having a down year this year relative to his standard, but he's still an elite edge rusher, which is great. Nick Herbig, he is a mini TJ Watt in some ways. He's great as a pass rusher, but he's not the run defender that Watt is, so that's where he diverges from Watt. But I would say he plays with a similar level of intensity, and he plays with the same sort of I can do anything mentality where you can drop him into coverage a little bit. He can defend the run. He's just not at the same level that Watt is. I would say Herbig is a poor to average run defender depending on the game and matchup, whereas Watt is an elite run defender basically all the time. Cam Hayward now is, I would say, more similar to Watt than Herbig, actually, as Hayward is elite. They don't play anything alike, but I just mean in talent. Hayward and Watt, both elite run defenders, elite pass rushers, just super great high intensity players. I love watching Hayward play. He's forever getting like 40 yards downfield and making tackles, which is something you don't want to see because it means that you're giving up about a 40-yard play. But to see that big of a man just run, it's like he's doing the 40-yard dash, but like on an angle. It's incredible stuff. Keanu Benton, one of my favorite players in the entire NFL. He's a great pass rusher, goes underrated though, with all of the other great pass rushers on the team. He's a poor run defender, but I'm willing to live with that. The player that I mentioned that isn't technically a starter, but is starter caliber, is Landon Roberts, who is elite as a run defender. He is maybe the best run defending linebacker in all of football. And I don't say that lightly because Roberts is that dang good. He is super physical. He's just like a heat seeking missile. They bring him in for goal line plays mainly, or just when it's absolutely a running down. And he makes plays that are just astounding. Next is Deshaun Elliott, who is similarly a great run defender, but at safety now. He's not as good of a run defender as Roberts is, but that's not really a slight on Elliott. That's just Elliott is really, really good. Roberts is elite. So there are some really good run defenders on this team. Minka Fitzpatrick, he's a great run defender as well, but he's also really good in coverage. He allows them to play a lot of single high coverages, which is something you can do only if you do have a good deep downfield safety. So Fitzpatrick is very pliable, I guess. Is how I would describe him. He can play as a deep safety, he can play in the box. He's very useful. As for their poor defenders, they have 4 of them, which is really sucky because they have such elite talent, but then they also have some guys that bring it down. And I would say maybe a bit controversially rather, be nice if I could speak, that they have 3 poor cornerbacks. It's varying levels of poor, but it's not great. Dante Jackson has elite speed. He's very poor in coverage, though. I would say he's definitely one of the worst corners in football. They traded Deontay Johnson for him. I'm not going to say how I feel about that, but I'm guessing you can gauge based on the tone of my voice that I feel a certain type of way about that, even if Deontay is not playing up to par this season. Dante Jackson has never really played up to par. He's been mostly disappointing throughout his career. Someone who has played much better, though, but is kind of disappointing this year also, is Joey Porter Jr. He has great size and athletic abilities as well, but he's kind of struggling in coverage this year. Someone who has a lot of production, but I don't think is playing well in coverage is Beanie Bishop. He's poor against the run, and he's not great against the pass, I wouldn't say. So he really is somebody that I could see getting replaced with Sutton. I think Sutton, though he be a reprehensible person, could be an upgrade to Bishop at the nickel position. And then the final player, if you couldn't tell, is Patrick Queen. I was never high on the addition, and I have grown to dislike it with time because he's getting paid so much. He is a fantastic blitzer. I will not take that away from him. He's also good in coverage. He's not great in coverage, but he's good in coverage. And he's a poor run defender. You add that up together, and you have a pretty good, but not great linebacker that's getting paid top of the line money for the position. I don't love that. Overall, the Steelers have a lot of warts, but they have a lot of stuff that make up for them as well. And there's overall just a ton of talent on this team. It's a bit inconsistent. The defense is all over the place, albeit it's an elite one still. And the offense leaves some things to be desired, but they can definitely contend for a Super Bowl this year. And I don't say that lightly. I think if they play their best brand of football, they're going to be like the 4th best team in the AFC. But with that said, that's definitely good enough to win a Super Bowl. Those are my thoughts on the Steelers. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. And also be sure to like and subscribe for more NFL content.